All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Rachel Swanek, the Northeast Program Manager with the Forest Stewards Guild, and I am the manager of the Sustaining Ash Partners Network that is part of putting this webinar on today. I want to welcome you all to our webinar on incorporating lingering ash detection and breeding into monitoring and management. I want to start by just sharing a little bit of background about the Sustaining Ash Partners Network, also known as SAP-Ne, and what we do. So our goals are to encourage landscape level action to sustain ash and share stories of hope for ash preservation. We're a regional network here in the Northeast, and we're funded by the U.S. Forest Service, but we're administered by the Forest Stewards Guild. And one of our primary objectives is to host training and education events just like this that you're attending today. So if you're interested in learning more about SAP-Ne, I encourage you to check out our website and join our email list. We can put a link to it in the chat. And you can find out about more events that we're leading and also events that our partners are leading. And we got our partners that are here today as speakers. So before we kind of jump into the content of the webinar, I've got a little bit of housekeeping. As part of our funding, we track participant time at our events. So we're going to share a brief poll, just kind of tracking your time here. If you could just answer this quickly, it just helps us to meet the goals of our grant. We'll leave it up for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. No pressure if you don't end up answering it when we take it down, that's okay. But while you're all filling out the poll, I'm just going to share some ground rules about the webinar. So the webinar is going to last for around 90 minutes. We ask that you keep yourself muted during the webinar unless you are called on or you're asking a question. It'd be great if folks are comfortable putting their cameras on. Not necessary, but it's really nice to see faces. At SAP-Ne, we're all about building community. So if you're comfortable, put your cameras on. That would be great, especially during the Q&A. And we're also offering one continuing education credit with SAF for participation. So if you're here, your name will get submitted to get an education credit. So there's no action needed for that, but just know that one credit is being offered. And as I mentioned earlier, SAP-Ne is comprised of a network of partners. And so we're really excited to have our partners here presenting their work today. So our talks are going to be broken up into two parts. And maybe before I get into that, I think what we'll do is we'll close out the poll. And if you answered, amazing, thank you. And if not, no worries. We just want to get majority of participants. Close out of that. All right, so getting ready for our speakers. So as I mentioned, we're going to have two parts to the webinar. Our first speakers are Jonathan Rosenthal and Dr. Radka Wildova from the Ecological Research Institute. They will be presenting on their monitoring and managing ash program, also known as MAMA, for stewarding lingering ash or ash with resistance to emerald ash borer. And they'll be talking about how these trees are a really important part of resistance breeding efforts. There will be time for question and answers after their first talk. And then in the second half of the webinar, you're going to hear from two practitioners that are implementing these techniques from the MAMA program on their lands. The first is Pieter Van Loon. He's a forester from the Vermont Land Trust. And our last talk will be by Meredith Taylor, a biologist from the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And they'll both be sharing case studies, kind of going through their efforts to monitor for EAB, identify lingering ash, and establish MAMA plots across their lands. And then after that last part, there'll also be time for question and answers. So you can either hold your questions until the end, or you can put them into the chat as they come up, and we'll do our best to make sure all your questions get answered. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jonathan and Radka to get us started.
Okay, we're about to share our screen, and okay, let's hope this works. And hi, I'm Jonathan Rosenthal, and alongside me is Dr. Radka Wildova, our senior scientist, and we both created this presentation together, and we both direct the MAMA program together. The title of this presentation, as you heard, is Monitoring and Managing Ash, MAMA, How You Can Help Enable Lingering Ash Detection for Resistance Breeding. And our primary objective is to let everyone know all the different ways they can get involved in the MAMA program through partaking of large-scale data collection projects that we manage, and also incorporating the search for lingering ash into the management of the ash on lands that they manage. So we first developed MAMA in 2017 and started implementing it in 2018. We now have well over 100 partners, it may be closer to 200 partners, and the two presenters you'll be hearing from later are two of the very first organizations that were involved way back in 2018. So MAMA now is made possible, and this presentation is made possible by the Tree Species in Peril Collaborative Initiative led by the Nature Conservancy in collaboration with the U.S. Forest Service and with funding provided by the Nature Conservancy. So, MAMA is a program of ERI, that's us, the Ecological Research Institute, that enables detection of lingering ash through two avenues. First is data collection by natural resource professionals and community scientists. The second is encouraging management that facilitates lingering ash detection. We've already found 180 lingering ash in New York and adjacent parts of Connecticut. And that's really just because that's where the program has largely been focused in the Hudson Valley and adjacent areas of the Catskills in New York, but and also in Vermont, right from the beginning. But in Vermont, they've had the good fortune of not being long enough and heavily enough yet affected by EAB to be able to find lingering ash in those areas. But MAMA is rapidly spreading, so it's now being implemented throughout New England, as you'll see in a slide later. What are lingering ash and how are they used for resistance breeding? So we use a very specific technical definition of lingering ash that was developed by the U.S. Forest Service EAB Resistance Breeding Project. So the technical definition is that lingering ash are chemically untreated trees that were mature, by which we mean at least 4 inches DBH, during peak EAB invasion and stayed healthy at least 2 years after EAB killed at least 95% of the nearby ash. So in other words, we want to make sure that these are trees that were had the opportunity to be heavily attacked by EAB and somehow emerged healthy and persistently healthy for at least a couple of years after that peak infestation period. And what has been found is that trees that exhibit this quality typically have some level of heritable EAB resistance. So lingering ash have been found for all 3 widespread northeastern ash species, white, green, and black, or if you're in Maine, brown. And the USFS EAB Resistance Breeding Project, led by Jennifer Cook and Kathleen Knight and some other amazing colleagues there at the Forest Service Northern Research Station in Ohio, have shown that scion, which just means grafted twigs from lingering ash, can be used in selective breeding to yield highly EAB resistant trees. So they've already done this for green and white ash. They have not done this yet for black ash, primarily because they don't have a lot of black ash, or they didn't have a lot of black ash to work with. This is largely a function of the fact of where they are based, that green ash is overwhelmingly predominant, and they just did not really focus very much on black ash at all. So how does the resistance breeding project work? Since shortly after lingering ash showed up in Michigan and spilled over the border into Ohio, what they had going on is a network of monitoring plots. They would see when that 95% threshold was reached, and 95% mortality threshold plus a couple of years, then search for these lingering ash, collect scion from them, and graft them onto rootstock. This enabled replication, clonal replication of these lingering ash genotypes, so that typically for any lingering ash that they found and collected scion from, they would then graft these onto probably between 5 and 10 of these green ash rootstock and then assess them in a very particular way for resistance. And they would do that by placing a pre-counted number of EAB eggs on the grafted material after the tree has grown up sufficiently to accept them. And then they would see how many of these eggs would go through to each successive larval stage and ultimately to adulthood. So here we have a sample of the 2012 results. So this shows you how long they've been doing this. And here, if you see this color code on the right, this is the ideal outcome where the eggs or newly hatched larvae are killed by the host tree. Second best is larvae died in their early stages. And the worst outcome is that the larvae reach the final stages, that they make it all the way through development. So this example, this pie chart here, would be from trees grafted from susceptible controls. In other words, typical fully vulnerable trees to EAB. When they would put the EAB eggs on them, virtually all of them would go through to adulthood. In contrast, we can see these are names of different particular lingering ash trees from which they collected scion, and you can see here some of these actually did quite well in killing eggs or larvae. So here we have Frax 10, where basically a third of the eggs or newly hatched larvae were killed by the host, and then some were also killed in their early stages. Whereas, and here's another good one. So what do you do next? Well, you take a female lingering at female from once it's reached the stage where it can produce flowers, and a male from the point where it can produce flowers, and you cross-pollinate them and to yield the next generation. Now here you see that this male and this female, or vice versa, I'm not sure which are which, were not even such great parents to start this with. These just happened to be the first male and the first female that were ready to reproduce. So they couldn't wait to see what happened and they crossed them. Some turned out worse than their parents, some turned out like their parents, and some turned out better than their parents. So even starting with this very mediocre couple of parents here, you end up with at least one offspring that is really terrific. It's probably, I don't know, 85% or something like that, 90% successful at killing off the EAB larvae. So then you do this for another generation and you end up with really reliably highly resistant seed, which would be restoration quality seed. This is big news. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about this approach, which needs to be incorporated into the ash management toolkit. So resistance is likely needed even if biocontrol agents are established. And I think there are lots of folks working on different steps, different approaches to ash conservation. So we're focusing on resistance breeding, but there's also parasitoid establishment, insecticide treatment, silvicultural. They all have their place. They all need to fit together. But I think we each have a tendency at times to see our approach as a panacea, and probably none of them are. But biocontrol and and resistance breeding can particularly complement each other. But let's see about whether parasitoid establishment by itself is likely to be successful in completely suppressing EAB. And it probably is not. And that's just been shown by outcomes from when green ash were planted on a large scale in China, and they rapidly succumbed to EAB despite the presence of native parasitoids there, including two of the three parasitoid species that are being released here in North America. And that's presumably because the green ash that were exported to China, largely, like the trees that we have here, had not co-evolved with EAB, and the vast majority of them display virtually no resistance. So again, despite having the parasitoids there, these trees rapidly succumb. So a promising long-term approach in North America can be resistance breeding plus biocontrol. And the biocontrol can help suppress the populations of EAB, and then the effective resistance is even greater. And I'm just emphasizing the term long-term approach, that potentially these two can complement each other to be sustaining approaches over the long term. But there are certainly places and purposes for everything: seed collection, chemical treatment, parasitoids, etc. Using scion for resistance breeding has advantages over using seed. Here you see an example of some scion that were collected. Scion from lingering ash are genetically identical to it. In contrast, seed from lingering ash have only 50% of their genetic material from the mother tree, and the other 50% comes from dad. And you're never going to really know how resistant dad is. Dad may be a fully susceptible tree for all we know. Grafting of scion for mature lingering ash rapidly produces mature trees that are ready for breeding. So because we're collecting scion from adult trees that have already been flowering and so forth, typically you can then use them for crossbreeding in just within, maybe 2 or 3 years, because the trees just have to grow up, those grafted trees, big enough to be able to support the reproduction. To find lingering ash, we need to look at the right places at the right times. Looking in an area before the mortality threshold has been reached yields spurious lingering ash, not yet attacked enough by EAB. Waiting too long, however, also has its problems. First, there are lost opportunities because trees are likely to eventually die from EAB. Remember that the resistance is typically only partial, or other causes, such as an impatient person with a chainsaw, a lightning strike, a windstorm, and so forth. Also, very important, ingrowth is likely to be confused with lingering ash. By ingrowth, we mean trees that are growing into that 4-inch plus DBH size category after the EAB populations have crashed. So typically what happens is EAB will arrive in an area. Again, here in North America, the trees are largely susceptible because of a lack of coevolution with this pest. The EAB population explodes because there are so many susceptible trees to attack. And then when they've killed off almost all the trees, then the EAB population crashes. It never crashes to zero. It will hang out there at kind of ambient levels in the environment, but still that initial crash of EAB will enable some trees typically to recruit from seed and so forth, and then grow up, and they can get 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever number of inches tall, in diameter before the EAB population then crests again, because as this additional ash tissue is available for EAB to attack, the populations will rise again. So it's essentially a predator-prey cycle. So if you get in there within the right time window to look for lingering ash, shortly after that 95% threshold plus 2 years has been reached, that's the time to do it. So you have to look in the right places at the right times. So, Mama, hang on one second. Having a little technical issue. Uh, Mama action maps help identify where and when to search for lingering ash. So, we're having a problem here in that the slideshow will not advance.
Stop sharing.
I'm going to, of course, this has to happen. I'm going to stop sharing and try to advance it and then reshare. I guess that's what I'll do. And I don't know why this is happening. It will try sharing again and see if this will work. Okay. I don't know why that was being uncooperative. Hopefully it'll work now. So they are initially created on EAB detection history. with standard mortality trajectories and spread rates used to model where and when the 95% mortality will be reached. So we get this detection history largely from state agencies and also from other sources, including people directly reporting through the MAMA project when EAB shows up in a location. These are then refined and updated using MAMA's ongoing data collected on ash health and mortality. We'll get into that in a moment. And so these show areas that should be ready to search for lingering ash. And they also show areas that need more data and which MAMA projects to use to collect the needed data. So here's a master MAMA action map showing New York and New England. And we apologize to Maine. We're actually doing lots of stuff in Maine, and Maine is very important to us, but unfortunately it did not fit in this frame. We don't mean to slight it. But I'll just go through this quick color coding here, is that these red areas are areas where mortality is projected or known to be really high, typically, over 90%. And so these are areas where we want you to begin searching for lingering ash, and these are the areas where you will find lingering ash because there's sufficient mortality for a sufficiently long time. Next, these green areas are areas to do rapid ash mortality assessments. And these rapid ash mortality assessments, which you only do in areas with some level of mortality, will can then also reveal whether or not perhaps those areas also have high enough mortality to reveal lingering ash. And we should say that this map is painted with a very broad brush, and there's environmental variation, genetic variation, so that from place to place there can be higher and lower mortality. So this is just meant as a broad brush guide of what you should be doing, where you should be searching. And then here we have these blue areas also doing RAMAs because they may have some mortality. And finally, the easiest project to do is EAB ash surveys for areas where EAB has not yet been reported. And that's especially true in areas like New York, Massachusetts, and so forth. Massachusetts, where largely the state agencies have pulled back from doing very intense tracking and monitoring of where EAB is showing up because it's just assumed to a large extent to be just about everywhere. So I'm just going to go through these four data collection projects. As I mentioned, MAMA Ash EAB surveys. They're just quick reporting of EAB evidence, and they enable us, if we don't know that EAB is yet an area, to kind of start that clock ticking in our modeling that to project forward when EAB should achieve those high levels of mortality. The MAMA Monitoring Plots Network encompasses monitoring 40 untreated mature trees annually until all are dead. And if some are already dead from EAB when the plots are set up, that's fine, they're included. And it requires tagging trees, and the data determines timing of lingering ash search of the nearby area. And it also can be very, very useful to managers, which we'll get to shortly. The MAMA Rapid Ash Mortality Assessment, which we call MAMA RAMAs, are a less precise alternative to monitoring plots. And as I mentioned before, they're for sites that already show some mortality, and they're easier and quicker to do, in particular because they don't require tagging or multi-year commitment. So if you're a citizen scientist and want to do ash mortality monitoring on state park or other public lands, you don't have to go through the whole permitting requirement to bang tags into trees, which makes things a lot easier. And finally, the culmination is the MAMA lingering ash search, where you search in those high mortality areas and report lingering ash from them so that potentially cyan can be collected from them. All our four projects are on the Anecdata platform, which, if you're not familiar with it, is a platform for very rigorous citizen science. It's the platform that NASA uses for all its citizen science projects, such as tracking asteroids that may kill all life on Earth. So they think Anecdata is really reliable, and so do we. Data can also be collected on TreeSnap or on APCAW, GMRI's Ash Inventory project. That's for a couple of the data projects. And you can also submit data using a smartphone, tablet, PC, or via email, or even snail mail. In other words, we just want your data. And so there's a link at the bottom of this slide to obtain the paper forms, which you can download from our website. So just here's a quick town level map of data collection in New York, in New York and New England, and you can see that it's largely based in the Hudson Valley and much of New York for two reasons. One, we're based there, but secondly, it's also the hotspot for northeastern invasion and long-term infestation with EAB. And it's prioritized for searching for lingering ash, but this is already out of date because we're already getting this season data collection beyond these points that are indicated here. MAMA has already detected 180 lingering ash in New York and Connecticut. You can see examples of all three species. And I just want to call out one individual tree, not a human. It's a lingering black ash, 20.5-inch DBH at a Hudson Valley site that first had signs of EAB in 2014. And we had the great fortune of finding this tree while a delegation from APCAW was visiting us, and we were describing our data collection methods and how they can be integrated into management and so forth, and happened upon this tree, which we had not come across before. So it's an honest to goodness large lingering black ash. We have collected scion from all three species. This is done in the winter when buds are dormant, and you can see Radka and me using a very large slingshot called the Big Shot to collect scion from high up in these trees. Scion of all three species have been grafted by the Coldwater Pond Nursery, which is just an absolute expert facility in grafting trees, particularly ash. And then after the grafts took and the trees grew a little bit, they were transferred to our partner at Cornell University, the Botanic Gardens there, to grow these trees for resistance breeding. And these trees are a lot bigger right now. These are trees that were collected in January of 20. These are from sign collected in January of 2024. And I was just informed that some of them are over 7 feet tall already. So these will be used for resistance breeding. Monitoring plots, as I mentioned, are helpful not only in revealing where and when to search for lingering ash, but they can also inform management. So they often reveal the mortality has been estimated and or wrongly attributed to EAB. On many occasions, we've been told by land managers that they already have 95% mortality or 100% mortality from due to EAB, and we've gone there and found that the mortality is actually vastly overestimated. And I think that's because of an emotional response that all of us have, even scientists, even land managers. When we see the trees starting to die off, we say, oh, they're all dead, or they're just about there. And so often the mortality is overestimated, and not infrequently trees that have been killed by something other than EAB are wrongly attributed to EAB. So we've been to sites where there's actually no sign whatsoever of EAB. There are quite a few dead trees, probably from ash yellows, and the managers don't come to that realization until they set up a plot and then have to look very carefully at the trees and categorize EAB evidence. And in particular, we focus on definitive EAB evidence comprising the D-shaped holes in the serpentine galleries. But just as importantly, plots reveal variation in mortality trajectories, which can affect management timelines. So this is just from a subsample of our white ash monitoring plots. And you can see that some plots go to virtually 100% mortality within 4 years, but others don't get there until at least 7 or 8 years. And this is similar to data that some other researchers have found. So again, probably partially due to population genetic variation, but also largely environmental variation. There's great range of outcomes once EAB shows up at a site. That die-off can happen very quickly or very slowly. And so this should be able to inform management that I think often folks are kind of stampeded into thinking that EAB is about to arrive. We better really quickly do something. And they kind of have a panic response, which is not as productive, especially if you have more time to deal with things and you're trying to create long-term strategies. So how can managers enable lingering ash detection? One is through participating in MAMA data collection, just as anyone else can. And so one is establishing the monitoring plot. Another is doing if the status of your trees, and I should mention, monitoring plot you can do before EAB arrives, after it arrives, after it's killed almost all the trees, although in that case it's probably more efficient to do a RAMA. Searching for lingering ash if mortality is sufficiently high, and doing ash EAB surveys if EAB has not already been reported from your land. But how else can managers enable lingering detection? And this is really crucial, is by incorporating into cutting and treatment plans. So you want to make sure that you leave enough standing healthy ash uncut and untreated for possibility of some turning out to be lingering ash. So there are really good reasons to cut trees, if for economic purposes potentially, or if they're hazard trees and so forth. But if you leave, instead of proactively cutting or treating all of your healthy ash, if you set enough aside that will give a reasonable possibility of some turning out to be lingering ash, and we all do that, all managers do that across the landscape, then collectively we can leave thousands and thousands, if not more, of healthy ash, uncut, that some of them will turn out to be lingering ash. And you can certainly, if they're not in monitoring plots, you can cut them as soon as they begin to decline, because you'll know, you can see that tree start to decline. You realize, okay, that's not a lingering ash. However, when most ash are dead or in severe decline, even if you're not at that 95% mortality threshold, you should protect from cutting any remaining healthy mature trees. Let's say you're at 50% mortality, and of those 50% that are living, 10% are really healthy and 40% are in really bad shape. Those 10% are the pool of trees, of candidate trees that can hold lingering ash that'll ultimately reveal themselves. So once you've reached that point, it's good to refrain from cutting any of those trees as long as they're healthy, because it's among that pool that the lingering ash will emerge. And what do you do if you find lingering ash? And by the way, here's a photo of Meredith Taylor, who will be presenting later, of her in action in the field working on a mama plot. Once lingering ash are found, report them on the Mama Lingering Ash Search Project. And we'll share information on how you can connect with us in the future and the website from which you can download all of the necessary materials. Again, protect. So once you've found a lingering ash and you've reported it, then we validate it. We want to make sure it's not a lingering hickory or a lingering box elder, and that the mortality around the tree is high enough to actually reveal it to truly be a lingering tree. So once it's been validated, then we can arrange for scion collection. And after, so you want to make sure not to cut it until scion are collected. If you really are impatient to collect it, to cut it, please hold off on that. And once reported and verified or validated, as I mentioned, you can then chemically treat the tree to prolong its health. As I mentioned before, lingering ash are typically only partially resistant, so they too will often succumb maybe a few years beyond that 2-year horizon. And you can prolong their health, and then you can continue to use them for seed collection if they're female, or also for pollen collection. So targeted seed collection is another, from lingering ash, is another avenue to resistance breeding, and so is pollen collection, which is largely flown under the radar. But we can use pollen from lingering ash in our breeding program. One of the big takeaways that I hope you take away from this is that there are tasks for each stage of EAB infestation that can facilitate lingering ash detection, ranging from pre-infestation when EAB has not even yet shown up at that area. So doing things that you're already familiar with, such as ash documenting, assessing ash presence and important, but then also documenting the infestation onset, obviously when it shows up, coming up with an overall plan strategy, deciding which trees should be cut or treated versus left for mortality monitoring and lingering ash detection, implementing other site-appropriate silvicultural and mitigation approaches, and so forth. And I just to skip through this quickly, and as I mentioned before, monitoring plots are pretty much always appropriate. And then as the infestation progresses, it moves on to rapid ash mortality assessments, and then protecting, reporting, recording potential lingering ash. And finally, in the late infestation, which people think of as the time when it's really hopeless, when it's like, well, all the ash trees here are dead. It's gone the way, ash have gone the way of the dodo or the passenger pigeon or the dinosaurs. It's in those areas that you need to search for lingering ash. So instead of having resignation and giving up hope, it may not be a fun experience or pleasant to be out in stands of dead ash trees, but if you put in enough time, you will find lingering ash. And the satisfaction of doing that is tremendously rewarding because then you're helping in long-term ash restoration and conservation. And for more information on MAMA, uh, please visit the MAMA website, www.monitoringash.org, which is now being updated. Just the progress in the program has rapidly outstripped our ability to, or time available to update our website. But you will find a lot of resources there, including an overview of the program, information on ash identification, links to all of our data forms and other materials. And you can email us, the coordinators of the MAMA program, me, Jonathan Rosenthal, and right next to me, Radka Wildova. And if you have any questions, we're happy to take them now. And we also just see this as the beginning of a discussion and a conversation. And feel free to reach out to us by email. And we'd love to find out what you do and how you see MAMA fitting in with all of the ash conservation activities that you are doing. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you to the hosts for having us.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jonathan and Radka, answering questions in the chat. So at this point, we'll open up a little bit of time for question and answers before we shift to the case studies. There is a react button in the bottom bar on your screen, so you're welcome to click that and use the raise hand function. I'll get us started with one of the questions that came in the chat from Tessa Dowling. Tessa asks, how do you determine that the larvae was killed by the host tree and not by another cause?
Right, great question. So, one of the things that we'll provide, which we haven't yet done, at our website, is a link to a terrific paper by, oh, actually, it's already, Radka apparently has already furnished the link in the chat, but we'll also put it on our website. The terrific paper done by Jennifer Cook and her colleagues at the Resistance Breeding Program, where they show exactly how they differentiate. But typically, if the larvae is diseased or killed by a parasite or something like that, there are evident signs of that. Whereas when it's killed by the tree, it just what happens is you just see kind of a dead larva, and then ultimately that gets calloused around. But there's much more technical. Their criteria are very clear and included in the paper, which Radka has linked in the chat.
Thank you. Next
You're welcome.
question came in from Michael Mori. Would there be a way for landowners who participate in the program to obtain resistant stock in the future?
So the potentially, so um, I don't know if I think that's if there's a particular program such as in place such as it had been done with chestnuts where that's a trade where you're participating and then those materials are made first available to the people who participated. That would be nice. We can look into that. But what the goal really is to create these seed orchards that could generate seeds for different regions on a large scale and then make those available. And none of that would be, for profit. What we are doing is other ways that you can participate as a landowner and land manager is potentially to get involved in planting out these clone banks of lingering ash grafted trees, and also eventually in testing their ability not to resist EAB, not through placing eggs on them, but by actually having them out in ambient EAB levels and seeing how they do in the environment. So that's another way that people can participate. So potentially there you could be right at the cutting edge of having lingering ash clonal progeny or bred putatively resistant trees to plant out to assess their resistance.
And that's a good transition to the next question that came in from Margot Walston, who asks, has the next generation of these trees been outplanted and tested for their resistance?
So where we are now is basically the first, because this program has been underway for quite a while, the so that first generation of sexually produced trees, in other words, the first selectively bred generation of trees is out there in places such as the Holden Arboretum in Ohio and some other locations in Ohio and Michigan. And those are being, are just experiencing EAB, and we're tracking how they're handling them, which largely seems to be quite well. And from those will then furnish the seed that are used for the next generation. But one thing I should mention is that, as I showed in those pie charts, the trees that we used to yield that first and second generation that you saw were not particularly great lingering ash parents. So since then, they've been doing breeding using beginning from much more highly resistant trees, even lingering highly resistant lingering ash parents. And so they've already gotten, even in the first generation, very highly resistant trees.
I'm curious myself if you could talk a little bit more about the collection of scion and how, a little bit more about the mechanics of doing that, the process, and then, if people wanted to do that on their own land, is that something that you ask landowners to do? Do you come out and do that with people? Um,
Sure. That's a really great question. So, what it involves is, again, going out in the dead of winter. We do all of our collection in January, and all the material that we've been collecting in New York and Connecticut, we have sent to that one particular grafting facility, who then sends it on to Cornell to grow out. We now have another propagation center in addition to Cornell, known as the Land Stewards, who are in New York, right by the Connecticut border. So going forward, we'll be sending material to both of those. And we're looking to partner with other institutions throughout the region so that there can be local regional propagation centers, which will make things a lot easier. And also, you want to propagate trees in areas that have similar environments to where the scion has been collected from, etc. So to date, we've been doing the bulk of scion collection, especially Radka, and Cornell has collected scion from some black ash that are near MAMA monitoring plots that they've been monitoring for us for a number of years. So they have professional sign collectors who have done that. We will be working on training up people who want to learn how to do scion collection. It's not easy, and you have to do a really good job of it, because when you're cutting the scion off the tree, you could be really injuring the tree. And often the lingering ash, or any ash tree, will have not a lot of branches that you can reach. A mature ash, especially in closed canopy forest, you may have to get up, 20 or 30 feet to get to the nearest branch and the nearest twigs to collect a scion. And so it's a limited resource, and you don't want to butcher them when you're trying to collect. So we are planning on training collectors. So the materials that you need to do the collection are, if it is, some trees actually have low, healthy branches that are exposed to enough sunlight, where they're branches that are programmed to flower, which is crucial. Even if they're not flowering this particular year, you just want those branches that are getting a lot of sunlight. And you can use hand pruners, and a little farther away, you use pole pruners. And now we have a pole pruner that has a 30-foot extension, right? And then we have the big shot, slingshot. So you have to master these. You have to get really good at aiming them. And yeah, we want to train up lots of partners, but you would have to probably invest in those materials, in the equipment, or we're looking at, for instance, in New York, potentially supplying the PRISMs, the Partnerships for Regional Invasive Species Management, with that equipment, so that they could lend it out to partner collectors throughout their regions. And perhaps it's something, we can discuss with you, Rachel, and SAP-Ne and other partners of creating a network of having this material so folks don't have to invest a few $100s to get their own slingshot or whatnot. And so it's something we want to expand, but we don't want people just willy-nilly trying to collect on their own without being trained and kind of certified or approved because you can do a lot of damage. And for that reason, also, we don't publicly share the exact locations of any of the lingering ash trees because we're aware that there can be folks out there, nobody who's on today's meeting, who can see it as, wow, I can make $1 million, breeding my own lingering ash trees and selling them, and that they could then go and butcher these trees. So we keep those secret. But if you're, get trained up as a collector and so forth, we would welcome that participation. It's something we really need to explore because we cannot be everywhere at once. And the areas that have been long enough invaded are rapidly expanding. So now it's much of New York State. It's also probably a decent part of the western portion and even possibly central Massachusetts, virtually all of Connecticut, and possibly southern New Hampshire as well. So we need to have people looking across the region, and we can't be there, and people collecting. So it's something we welcome participation in that, and we have to develop a model for training and for making equipment available.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. It sounds like there's a lot of similar lessons learned from the seed collection work that folks are doing that we could kind of mirror here. Well,
Sounds
just
great.
everyone on track, I want to thank you again, Jonathan Radka. There's a couple questions in the chat that came up, so maybe you can respond to those. If you want to go ahead and stop screen sharing.
Mhm. Hopefully it'll behave. There we
Wonderful.
go.
All right. Thank you both so much. And what we'll do now is we'll shift over to our case studies. So I'm going to hand it over to Pieter Van Loon from Vermont Land Trust to get us going.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Hi, everybody. My name's Pieter Van Loon. I am the Forest Program Director for Vermont Land Trust. And I'm not sure if folks know who Vermont Land Trust is. So for those of you who don't, we're a land conservation organization who's conserved about 11% of Vermont. That's about around 650,000 acres. You see it displayed there in those dark green, small and large blobs around the state. That's about 2,300. It's probably actually closer to 2,500 parcels at this point. And as I was pilfering slides from other presentations to build on this one, I ran across this and decided to keep it. It's a purpose statement from a couple years ago that describes what VLT does, and I included it because I think it also perfectly describes why we got interested in and involved in the Mama Project. Taking on a mama plot really helps people protect, care for, and connect to their own little piece of Vermont. Because we have the potential to affect management on so many acres of land, we feel we have an obligation, the Land Trust does, to help all landowners in Vermont work through land management issues. And EAB is one of the most significant issues many landowners have had to deal with. And Vermont was the third state, or excuse me, the 32nd state to find EAB, and that meant we got to learn a lot from those who came before us. But it also meant that there were these early messages that turned out to be not great advice, and Jonathan talked about this a little bit, but they were really ingrained in people's brains, and we knew we were going to have to work hard to dispel some of those messages. And the first one was EAB is going to kill all your ash. And, that's a pretty depressing and I think debilitating statement. It doesn't leave any room for hope. And we feel really that one of the biggest strengths of the Mama Monitoring Plot program is that it gives people that sense of hope. It gives them something to work towards rather than sit back and watch, or more likely not pay attention to what EAB is doing. People involved in the program are taking positive steps. They're going out, they're observing what's happening on their land, they're making notes, they're watching the progression of EAB and working towards perhaps finding a lingering ash in their area, which, as Jonathan said, would be incredibly rewarding. The PowerPoint that I took this map from is from a webinar that our ecologist, Alaire Diamond, did on setting up MAMA monitoring plots, and she titled it "Monitoring for EAB: Establishing Points of Hope," and that's just such a really important part of the program. We met and got trained by Radka and Jonathan in May of 2018. EAB was found in Vermont in February of that year. And we went to a property in Arlington that has a black ash swamp and set up the first plot in Vermont. And for the first 5 years, pretty much nothing happened. The trees looked the same the whole time. And during this time, I felt it was really helpful that we were working in pairs to do the monitoring, because having two people there, especially in the beginning, allows you to discuss things like, what's the health class of this tree? Is it a 2 that's lost some leaves but doesn't have any dieback, or is it a 3 with just a tiny bit of dieback? Getting used to gathering the data and being accurate in your descriptions, it really helps to have a couple of people there. And you can also have one person entering information into the data sheet or in the app, and the other standing back and assessing the health of the tree. And if you are the person standing back assessing, I suggest you might want to bring binoculars. It really helps you see what's happening up in the top of the trees. In year 6, the trees started to look a little ragged, but it wasn't really clear whether they looked poor because of EAB, or that was actually a really heavy seed year. So all the females looked like they had been pretty well stressed by the effort they put out to produce all those seeds. And it wasn't really clear that EAB was there, so we didn't include it in our data that year. Year 7, the next year, there was definitely signs of mortality. And this year, year 8, 1/3 of the trees, 33%, are dead, and there is now really clear evidence of EAB on this site. D-shaped exit holes, serpentine galleries, the whole works. So immediately after our training with Jonathan and Radka, we went out and we started to promote the program to owners of conserved land and other partners. That included consulting foresters, state foresters, towns that had town forests and wanted to get involved, and other nonprofits. And they were all excited to have the opportunity to actually do something. It gave them a little hope. You see the two folks in the picture here are Rich and Ann Chalmers. They're owners of conserved land in the central part of the state, and they are picture perfect MAMA participants. They have a system for gathering the information, and they do it every single year. And this is one of the things that's really important if you're going to get involved in MAMA plot monitoring. You have to make sure that you set aside time each year when you'll be able to do the assessment. Set a calendar reminder if you need to, and make it recurring. Make it part, if you're a land trust like we are, it helps if you make sure you have the capacity to follow up front and actually make it some part of someone's job description. This is something that they're going to do in the course of their work over the year. The program provides a great opportunity for us to do annual outreach and messaging around our events or our efforts, and the progression of EAB on our properties. So it's worthwhile being organized and prepared. But if you falter a bit, one of the greatest strengths of this program is its support system in the form of Radka and Jonathan. If you have a question, they are always quick to answer. And if by chance you happen to forget to enter your data for a year, you'll likely get a gentle nudge from one of them to please enter the data, which is really helpful. A related message that we knew we were going to have to fight in the forest industry, and Jonathan talked about this as well, is you need to cut all your ash before EAB kills it. There was this, on its face, that's absurd, right? As Jonathan said, chestnut blight, butternut canker, beech bark disease, all these things have shown that that just isn't true and is actually counterproductive. There's very likely, in fact, we have found that there are naturally resistant trees out there, but we need to give them the chance to express that resistance. So we felt really strongly right at the start that people managing forests had time to consider their options before doing an EAB related timber harvest. So we needed to be able to push back on this. And one way we could do it is by knowing where EAB was. And this map shows as of 2020 where EAB was when we were doing a lot of this outreach to foresters early on in the infestation. The purple circles and blobs, those are 5 and 10 mile buffers around known EAB infestations. So we knew where EAB was, and then as you can see, we put monitoring plots in various places, many of them outside of those blobs or on the periphery, so we could sort of track where it had been found and where it had been searched for and not found, importantly. And we use this information to bolster state and federal monitoring programs and push back against that forest management prescription that called for salvaging ash due to the imminent arrival of EAB. Since we were asking people to make informed decisions on how to manage their lands, we felt we needed to do outreach and education for foresters and landowners on best management practices. We did webinars and in-person workshops in partnership with the state, with Vermont Coverts, the Forest Stewards Guild, Jonathan and Radka, and the University of Vermont. And one of our priorities was raising awareness around the effects of EAB on black ash and its cultural significance to Indigenous folks. You see at the top right a workshop we did for foresters where Les Benedict kindly came down and presented on the Indigenous cultural values associated with black ash. That was really a great day. And we at Vermont Land Trust made a conscious decision to do more in areas where black ash is found, not just for the cultural importance, but also because, unlike some other states, black ash is relatively uncommon in Vermont. So it makes it all that much more important to protect. So we are doing more monitoring plots and more protection in those areas. The results of all this work with partners were publications and webinars on how to manage EAB. And I could spend all day talking about that. And if anybody wants to know how to do it, I'm happy to help. As Jonathan said, the first order of business is making sure to keep the best ash on your site, keep the healthiest ash there, and go from there. And there are specific silvicultural or forest management approaches described in these webinars and publications, but they're all nested within an integrated approach to management. We hosted a webinar back in May that Tony D'Amato from UVM and Paul Catanzaro from UMass did. It's on our YouTube channel. If you want to go check it out. In it, Tony talks about this integrated approach to management and takes into consideration the economic, ecological, and cultural values of ash and suggests a variety of ways or approaches to, as he puts it, manage the forest, not the bug. It's important to continue to manage the forest for the best trees that will grow on that site. Don't react to the bug, react to the health of the forest in front of you. And I really like one point that Paul made when describing ways to preserve ash on the landscape. He said, a lot of people still feel like this is because EAB is here, this is the end of the story of ash. It goes back to that first idea of ashes or EAB is going to kill all the ash. He points out that this is actually the middle of the story. We don't know what the end of the story is. And if we want a happy ending to that story, we need to stay engaged. And he points to folks in that webinar to the Mama Project and urges people to get involved, start monitoring and looking around for those lingering ash. And the final piece of VLT's integrated pest management approach is chemical treatment via stem injection to preserve specimen trees or groups. Back in 2021, with funding from the Forest Service, we purchased an ArborJet injection equipment and started treating groups of trees We treat anywhere from 12 to 20 trees in a 1 to 2 acre area. And we've done this on 10 properties we own. I noticed somebody asked in the chat what the ratio of male to female trees should be. We're trying to get somewhere between 2/3 and 3/4 of the trees that are being protected female and the rest male. Um, on our sites, we have both white ash and black ash, and we are protecting small to large saw timber sized trees. On two of those sites that we're protecting, we've also recently conducted silvicultural treatments with the goal of regenerating ash. And on one of those sites where we did a regeneration cut, we also have a mama plot. So again, all these efforts nicely complement each other and fit together. You see on the map on the right locations where a group of several nonprofit and public partners have joined VLT in creating these so-called preservation patches of ash. That includes the Forest Service, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, Equinox Preservation Trust, TNC, Vermont Institute of Natural Science, and a couple of towns. One of the main goals of this work is to conserve the genetic diversity of ash, and research has shown that treating fewer trees, so we only go up to 20 on any particular site, but doing that on more sites distributed across the landscape is the best approach to maintaining that genetic diversity. This map, unfortunately, is a little out of date. It shows 33 sites around the state. There are actually now 43, and the goal is to have 50, hopefully by the end of the field season, but if not then, at least by early next year. So for us, for the Vermont Land Trust, it all started with the monitoring plots, the mama plots, and it's grown from there. And as we discovered and got involved in other strategies, the mama plots are still right there. They are not left behind. They continue to be a really important part of the work because they're showing us the trajectory of EAB in Vermont, and they're queuing up that next phase of the work, which is the search for lingering ash. And for us, as the Vermont Land Trust, that work happens on our fee lands, the property that we own. Those are the places where we can do all this demonstration, showcase all the approaches, and show other forest landowners how to do it, help them get comfortable and decide on maybe a strategy of their own. So if you want to see how it works on the ground, come on over to Vermont. Be glad to show you around. And with that, I'll wrap it up and hand it off to Meredith.
Thanks, Peter. All right. I'm gonna
Let's see, I need to
over here.
figure out how to.
There we go. All right. So I'm going to share our experience implementing MAMA in the New York City watershed. A little bit of background for you. Okay. So I'll share with you more information about what the New York City watershed is, how we've been monitoring for the emerald ash borer, establishing our MAMA plots, monitoring our MAMA plots, and successfully identifying lingering ash. I'll share some lessons learned and then talk about our next steps and what we're doing to restore and maintain our future forests. I am Meredith Taylor. I'm the Invasive Species and Restoration Program Supervisor here at New York City Department of Environmental Protection in the Bureau of Water Supply. So a little bit of background info here. The New York City watershed is comprised of 19 reservoirs and 13 controlled lakes. Our system capacity holds 570 billion gallons of water, so not too small. We deliver approximately 1.1 billion gallons per day to 9.8 million people in New York City and the 4 counties north of the city. The size of our watershed is 2,000 square miles, roughly the size of the state of Delaware, and it is spread across 8 upstate counties and 2 states, a little bit of Connecticut in addition to New York. So you'll notice in that watershed area, we do have parts of the Hudson Valley included in there, as well as the Catskills, which Jonathan had indicated are some of the hardest hit areas in New York from the emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer was first detected in Ulster County in 2010. From 2011 to 2013, DEP worked with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Forest Service on a program called SLAM, Slow Ash Mortality. This involved creating girdled trap trees in the highly infested areas. The trees were then cut and debarked. This was part of an effort around the fringes of the known infested area to slow down the spread. This program was fairly short-lived as satellite populations of emerald ash borer were popping up all over, and the spread was continuing very rapidly. But it just indicates how hard hit this area was. In 2014, our foresters with the Department of Environmental Protection began to do some salvage harvest for ash. They are reliant on timber sales to do our forest management work. And so we needed to do some ash salvage work in order to be able to do other management efforts that we wanted to get done in these areas. And so we had some large scale salvage projects. We started considering other options in 2018 with the MAMA program. This was a new and exciting opportunity to take some action in a proactive way, as Peter mentioned, to give a little bit of hope to a very depressing issue that we were facing. The MAMA plot network seemed like an easy, approachable tool for us to better understand how the spread was moving through the watershed. We had seen that really early and rapid initial spread, and we wanted to know how impactful this issue was going to be across the watershed, both as a forestry issue as well as a hazard tree issue. We had significant resources that were devoted to doing hazard tree removal as well along roads that we maintained and around our facilities. So that was an additional concern. In 2024, we were lucky enough to identify and collect scion from our first lingering ash, which was adjacent to one of our established MAMA monitoring plots. So that was very exciting. So establishing our MAMA monitoring plots, we've learned quite a bit. We have 5 established plots that we created. They were done by DEP staff as well as our summer interns. And this is a lovely summer intern project because it is real data collection. It allows the interns to become familiar with using a GPS unit, identifying a tree species. It's very hands-on. So overall, a great project for the summer interns to work on. One key factor, though, is in the instructions for the MAMA monitoring plot establishment, it says monitoring plots can be of any shape and of flexible size, from a half an acre to 10 acres, as long as the ash trees within them meet the project's criteria. One of the things we struggled with the interns was that they tended to meander and wander, so they did need quite a bit of direction when establishing the plots, not to go too far, because it does make the follow-up monitoring after the establishment much, much harder when they wander and don't tag trees in an organized fashion. Other challenges that we faced, we didn't have enough hammers to go around. You can see someone in this photo is using the back of a hatchet to put the nail in the tree. We were using rocks and other tools that we were able to get our hands on. Didn't work very well. I do recommend having proper nails and hammers when you are installing your tree tags. We lost quite a few of the tree tags, so any additional way to document the area of the plot or the locations of the trees, the more ways you can ease the recovery of those trees in the future, the better. And as I mentioned, we had large groups of interns working on this, so they sometimes would go in different directions or skip some trees and just made everything a little bit more chaotic. We're also working in an area with limited cell phone service, so we did do paper forms plus the electronic data entry, which it was really nice to have multiple options, made this project much more approachable for us. So as we had our 5 plots established, we've gone back annually to do monitoring. DEP staff and interns work together to do these annual monitoring visits. Of the 5, one of our plots now has reached 95% mortality, so we no longer monitor that one, but we have 4 that we continue to monitor. We are still using both the paper and the electronic version of the data collection. In going back to monitor, as I mentioned, some of our areas, we have a lot of trouble finding some trees that have lost their tags. It's a pretty regular occurrence for us that we spend the last half hour on the site hunting down a few remaining trees that we can't seem to find. In some of these areas, we have limited GPS abilities to get a really precise location on the tree because of the tree cover. Some of the healthier sites, the GPS doesn't see all the satellites, and so that can make it challenging. We also have lost trees from other issues, as Jonathan mentioned. The emerald ash borer is not the only thing killing ash trees, and so we've had some blowdowns and other reasons trees have come down and have fallen in left canopy gaps, which leads to tall vegetation. And so coming back to the site and navigating over downed woody material in tall vegetation can be sometimes very hazardous and challenging. It makes for a grueling day. We also have long travel time to our sites. As I mentioned, the watershed is as big as the state of Delaware. And so we have multiple hour-long trips to our monitoring plots, which can make it a challenge to get out to them each year. As I mentioned, with trees coming down for a blowdown, for example, or just the ash trees naturally dying back, we do see the sites changing very dramatically from year to year. And so relying on your visual memory of how to navigate through the site can't be relied upon as the sites are changing over time. So identifying the lingering ash. When our monitoring plot reached 95% or 98% in 2022, and our area was designated as searchable, the red as indicated on the map, we were able to go out and wander around, and we found 2 healthy trees just outside of our monitoring plot. And we were able to notify the Ecological Research Institute, and Radka did come out and do a scion collection on our lingering tree, and that's the pole pruner there, or is that the big shot? I think that's the big shot there. We were able to get some limbs down that were pretty high up, and that's a little bundle of scions there that are ready to go off to be grafted. So that was very exciting. Some lessons learned from our experience. It's really great to be involved in such a proactive project and collaborative project. We learn a lot about what's going on in our area from other mama plots set up by others in our area. It helps us get a sense of what's coming, what's on the horizon as far as hazard tree management and impacts to our forests. It's a great experience to design the monitoring plots systematically. We've really been able to learn a lot and teach our interns about that importance of doing that systematically and as compactly as possible. We recommend that you use all tools at your disposal to mark and memorialize your tree locations. Any way you can reduce the amount of time it takes to search for your tagged trees is going to benefit you, especially when you're going year after year. And as I mentioned, some of our plots are not impacted at all by emerald ash borer, and we've been monitoring since 2018. So I would also recommend that as you're establishing these plots, you continue to you anticipate having that continued commitment for around a decade. We also recommend that you notice and find a way to track trees that look like they have a strong likelihood of being lingering. So even before an area is searchable, you can visually detect trees that are much healthier than those around them. And if you are able to flag them or mark them in some way, collect GPS location information, that can help you know where to look for the lingering trees once you reach that threshold. And just reiterating one more time that maintaining consistency will give you much more efficiency as you visit these sites year after year. So putting all your tags on the north side of the tree or the uphill side of the tree will make your life much easier going forward. For us, the next steps, our ash salvage work is really starting to wrap up at this point in the hardest hit areas. There isn't that huge push that Pieter mentioned to do that anymore. But we are going to continue monitoring our mama plots, and we're going to incorporate some restoration plantings and deer management in areas that have been hard hit by emerald ash borer. This information that we've gathered from the emerald ash borer is going to be useful and help us with the next forest pest issue that we're facing in our area, which is the beech leaf disease. As we see the canopy declining from emerald ash borer, we have many other invasive shrubs, Japanese silkgrass, other species that are filling in these canopy gaps. So we really need to focus on targeting these areas with canopy decline early. And so that's something we're going to continue to work on. We're also still looking for lingering ash, and as new areas become searchable, we plan to continue to do that. And we're hoping that we will be able to someday get some resistant seedlings for future planting work from the scions that are collected on our lands. So we'll be able to bring back those individuals back to where they came from and help fill in our forests for the future. There's my contact information. Thank you. I'll stop sharing there for some question and answer time.
That's great. Thank you so much, Meredith and Pieter. So we'll open it up to questions. You can put them in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask a question.
I actually have a question for Jonathan and Radka, if that's okay. So our plot has a combination of black and white ash. One of our plots does, the one in Arlington. And what I'm seeing is probably not unexpected, the black ash are going first. So I think because we only have a few white ash in our plot, we may get to that 95% mortality rate, but it'll all be in black ash. So the question is, if you have a mixed stand like this, should I be waiting until those white ash are also showing significant decline or have died as well before going out to do the lingering ash search? Or could I parse it out and once the black ash have died, start looking for lingering black ash and wait to do the white ash search later? What would you recommend?
I can unmute you. I think you're gonna have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, try again.
Sorry, try again. Thank you so much for that question. It's very important. And we have plots where people monitor several different species, and it helps to detect this difference between species. And actually on our current action map, for those plots in Vermont where you have already some mortality in black ash and no mortality from white ash, we actually put both numbers in the map. So seeing that the black ash is at 50% while we have 0% for the white ash. So definitely this is a great opportunity when you see the black ash declining to then go and look for the black ash. And you don't have to wait for the white ash, obviously, because the decline rates are very different for the species. And the same is true for green ash. And, in comparison to white ash, sometimes things can switch around depending if the co-occurring species are growing in whose preferred environment. So there can be sometimes decline maybe faster for white ash if it's a little too wet for the white ash. So
And can I just add something? I agree with everything Radka just said. But also, I think when we set up that plot, it was, I think actually our very first monitoring plot set up anywhere. You were right there at the beginning. And,
We're so honored.
and it was an honor to be hosted by you and learn so much from what you were doing. And what we've done it more recently is encourage people to just choose one species for the monitoring plot, and then potentially, if there are enough trees of each of the different species, to overlay different monitoring plots kind of superimposed. So we have, for instance, at North Branch, we have a black ash plot, and there are enough, I don't remember if it's white or green ash, that are actually interspersed among the black. We didn't include those, but someone now has asked to take that on as a second plot that's superimposed on the other, because what happens is exactly what you're concerned about and what Radka mentioned, which is if you're waiting for if you're combining everything, then that'll really retard your search for lingering black ash, and you won't find any because they'll all be gone by the time white ash even reaches that threshold. And it also means that interpreting our map, as I mentioned before, it's very broad brush, and it's actually largely driven by white ash just because that's what we have the most data from. And so if you are following black ash or interested in black ash because they tend to succumb faster, think a couple of steps ahead when you're looking at the map, at the monitoring, at the action map, and say, well, for white ash, it's only supposed to be at this stage, but we should get out there and look earlier for black ash.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a question in the chat for Meredith from Michael Maury asking, do foresters working in New York have special instructions regarding ash, what they're supposed to do when they find a stand?
So our foresters are using a variety of different factors when they make their decisions about where to do forest management projects. And right now, ash salvage is one among many of those factors, and we're prioritizing water quality with all of our work. So we're attempting to maintain forest cover and a diverse forest species structure, a diverse age structure. So it is a factor, but it's not the primary driver for decision making right now. It is interesting to watch, and you can use your mama plots to understand the speed at which the trees are succumbing to the emerald ash borer, so that information can be incorporated into planning for when to target certain areas based on where the emerald ash borer has been moving and the rate at which it's spreading. So it is a useful tool for that.
I'm going to ask a question for Pieter, just to talk a little bit more about how you determined where the EAB infestations were. Was this through like on the ground, going out and looking? Was it through using state data? Was it a combination? How did you approach that?
Yeah, for the most part, early on, it was through state data. They were doing a lot of searching, and federal also. They had hundreds of purple traps around the state of Vermont trying to find EAB. Actually, most of the early ones were just citizens who happened to see something that didn't look right, and they called the state and said, you might want to come look at this. And sure enough, it was emerald ash borer. I mean, that happened in Middlebury. It happened all the way up on the Canadian border in Newport. So it was largely, initially, and it was largely based on that state monitoring program.
Did you verify in the field?
Yeah, the state did for sure. I mean, we were constantly looking on our properties, so especially if one of our fee lands fell within one of those buffer areas, those 5 or 10 miles from the EAB and known EAB infestation, and then we really started to look and pay attention. That's also was a trigger for us as the map started to fill in around Vermont for when we were going to start to treat our trees. If EAB is within 5 miles, then it's time to really look for those trees that you want to protect and start doing some injections.
I also have a question for you, Peter. I was thinking about like the kind of many aspects that a land manager has to have in mind and a forester has to have in mind when coming to making these decisions. And I was wondering how you made the decision between what to monitor in the mama plots versus what to treat, and also like treat both with the insecticide injections, but also silviculturally, and yeah, what influenced your decisions there?
For the I haven't set up all the mama plots, so I can't speak to all of them across the state. But for the one that we did, like I said, we were concerned with trying to get some more data about black ash because it's just there isn't that much of it around. So we identified those areas where we had black ash swamps, and we set up a bunch of mama plots within those. Um, the management is then sort of nestled around that. So adjacent to that particular mama plot that I discussed in Arlington, we've also treated 20 trees. So we'll keep those going, hopefully. We haven't done any management there, but there's another property up north where we have done both those things. So um, part of the part of the decision about where to do it sort of depends on where they are, right? Where we have the ash. But if we have choices, we try to do it relatively close to a road or a log landing or something because we're also using this as an outreach opportunity, right? We're bringing our partners, we're bringing landowners out and showing them this work and encouraging them to get involved. And so we need it to be somewhere where it's relatively accessible. So that's another thing that we take into account.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Maybe we'll do one last very quick question for Jonathan and Radka. Just if you could give us a number, how many plots have been installed since you started the project?
Good question. I wish we knew the answer. What do you think?
A few hundred, but
Yeah,
it was
plots.
we like more recently expanded the geographic area of our program. So so I would say a few hundred
Yeah.
plots.
It's exponentially increasing. So
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, I think we're going to close out. Big thank you to our speakers for sharing all their expertise with us. Thank you all for being here. Hope that you enjoyed the webinar. And I think if there's one takeaway, it's that there is hope for preserving ash and that there are actions we can take on the landscape to have a positive impact on that. As a reminder, if you want to come to more events like this or hear about more events that our partners are hosting, you can check out the Sustaining Ash Partners website. Jonathan and Radka have an event coming up on July 22nd that Michelle just put in the chat with the Ash Protection Collaboration across Wabanakik and the Gulf of Maine Research Institute. It's an in-person event in Maine. It's on July 22nd. Encourage you all to check that out. Thank you all. I'll be sending out a brief survey, very few minutes. If you could just share your feedback on your experience with the webinar, helps us to keep events like this happening in the future. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.